In this video, I'm going to attempt to introduce you to optionals without going too deep into it. And I'm going to try and give you a fundamental understanding of why you would want to use optionals in the future when you become a more experienced developer. Because it's going to be a really important thing for you to understand at the beginning, but you might not grasp why you want to use them today, but you are definitely going to need them in the future. All right. So just trust me here that you are going to need this type of stuff. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say we want an optional integer, okay? And I haven't introduced you to nil right now. And so now I'm just telling you that this integer, it can have multiple states. If we were going to have another resource, and we were going to say that it's an integer of 1, this integer here cannot have the value of nil. All right, it just can't do it. When we compile it, nil cannot initialize specified type in. It just cannot have a nil value. However, when we put a question mark on the end of it, it can have a nil value. And this is called an optional. All right. Now, I don't particularly, if we just do the old question mark thingy bob here, you'll see it has the question mark on there. Now, there's another way of looking at this, but I want to skip over that in this one video, all right? And I just want you to focus on this. Now, as we know that variable declarations, they don't have to be initialized at the beginning. So if we start saying if resource is equal to 0, and then do this, and we then build this, it will say that it hasn't been initialized yet, all right? And then if we say, whoops, if we say print resource here, compile, it still doesn't allow it because it hasn't been initialized. So we need to initialize it. But what about if we want a resource that isn't going to have an initial value at the beginning, but we want it to have a nil, an empty value all the time? We don't want to add like a possible other state. We don't want to be saying if resource is equal to this synonymous type or value, then do this. Otherwise, do this. If we don't want to use this resource and because it's nil, then don't use it. That means something else hasn't happened. It's like a flag, okay? And so the way we do this is by making an optional, and this makes this resource is equal to 0 work fine. And when we run this, you can see here that we get nil down here. Now, if we come to the top and we say if resource is equal to nil, right? Then we can say resource is equal to 0. And now when we run this, you can see that we get an optional 0 down here. Now, what is exactly happening here? Well, because we haven't, if we come up here, you can see that we are checking to see if resource is equal to nil. But we know from previous videos that that you cannot read or access a variable until it has been initialized. Well, Swift compiler with optionals is giving you this. So this is basically saying it's equal to nil. All right, you don't have to essentially say is equal to nil. You can just define it, right? And it is already, so the first time you access it, basically, it's going to have that nil value. So it's going to be initialized at one point, and then you can re-initialize it as well. Now, optional properties like this are really good for holding resources like image pickers or stuff like that in memory whilst you need it. And then once you do remove this, it can then be something to remove it from memory manually. There's other ways and means of getting around this without using an optional, but I just wanted to say to you that this is like a placeholder to put something, and then if it is nil, then you know you haven't used it yet, and maybe you need to initialize it. Or if it is nil, then don't do something else. So it's a way of like having a flag with inside of your code whether you should or shouldn't do something. So this is basically my first introduction to optionals, and that if you do need to have a nil value, then this is what you would do. It would be an optional value. Just remember that you can have any type of other optionals, and it could be then like an optional string. Basically any type whatsoever can be an optional. And if we created a struct of person, and then we gave it any random properties, name here is a string, right? And then we basically said that it's got a token, right? And this is going to be an optional as well. Then we could say here that person is equal to a person, and this is optional too. This would be fine. And if person is equal to nil, then we're going to say, sorry, we still need to be a var. If person is equal to be nil, then we can say person here, and then name is going to be David, etc., etc., right? And then we can check here if person dot token is equal to nil, right? Then we can turn around and say print token is nil, all right? Now, what this is also doing, this question mark, is because we don't know here totally whether or not person is actually nil. And this question mark is basically going to stop this. It's going to be false if this happens. So this is not going to be executed here, okay? So this question mark is safeguarding you from doing this. Now, you can use the exclamation mark, but this is super dangerous and you should not do it. And there are other ways of avoiding doing that. And so just basically, if you want the long story short on this, don't do this. Don't do it outright. And if you were in my team, I wouldn't allow you to do it. All right, I would literally tell you, you can't do this. You've got to write some other code to get around doing this. And there are ways and means of doing it as well. Okay, so this is a way that you can use the nil property, right, of something. Okay, and like I said, this is just an introduction to optional. So I'm trying to just give you a super abstract introduction to it without diving too deep into it, because we need to dig a little bit deeper into Swift to truly understand what's going on there. Okay, with that said, I hope that you've got a little bit of information out of it, because that's all of this video was designed to be, was just a quick introduction to it, because we are going to dive into this a lot more, because optionals in Swift are super powerful thing to have, and to be able to master them is super important. So wait for the mastering optionals video, and this is where we'll dive super deep into using them. With that said, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and if you've got any questions, feedback or concerns, please make sure you put them in the comment section down below. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao, and goodbye.